a presentation we're doing today about resumes and cover letters and the mistakes that people make when they write resumes and cover letters. I had a pretty long PowerPoint prepared, but in order to make the most of this webinar, it's a live webinar, I thought it would probably be a lot more important and useful to conduct this in a Socratic fashion, where I'm going over some tools and ways that employers actually look at resumes and having you think about it, and people give answers, and we can go from there in terms of the best way to look at resumes and cover letters. Just to give you some insight into my experience with resumes and cover letters, at BCG, we have, I think, over 700,000 attorneys and law students and database that have actually contacted us looking for jobs. Every resume that comes in, I review personally and decide whether or not our company is going to work with them. We have lots of automated tools and things that we use to classify resumes when they come in terms of practice areas and the locations and the type of work that the person's doing. I honestly can take a look at a resume and very quickly get a sense of how employable the person is in a law firm in different types of positions. Because I've been doing it for so long, and over 20 years, we've generated hundreds of millions of dollars in fees from law firms and people that hire our candidates. So we have a good sense of this market, and while not perfect at it, we're continually evolving and getting better and better at it. So that's some of my background. I've been doing nothing but this for almost 25 years and understand it quite well. To start, I'm going to go over with you to understand how employers view your resume, because you always need to put yourself in the shoes of the people reviewing your resume, because the employers are the ones that are hiring you. While your resume is often a document that makes you happy, in reality, your resume is something that needs to make the employer happy. There's a concept in the Silicon Valley that's very popular. It was popular among Bezos, who I guess isn't necessarily Silicon Valley, but very popular among Musk and a lot of other people. It's based on Aristotle's first principles. And essentially what that says is you need to look at the root of what you're trying to do with anything that you're doing. What that means is if you're trying to build a rocket engine, for example, when SpaceX was trying to build rocket engines, Musk was told that the rocket engines were $60 million. And he said, that's ridiculous. Why does something like this have to cost $60 million? He said, what components is it? What are the components that it costs? How much would it cost to get the components? And he realized that for about $120,000, you could get all the components to build a rocket engine. So there was no reason it needed to cost $60 million. He did the same thing with batteries. And that's one of the reasons I said, batteries are so expensive. So when you take your resume, what you need to do is you need to break it down under this first principles of Aristotle, which is basically you take things and you look at what your goal is. Your goal is to understand what the employer is looking for and tailor it towards that. We're going to talk in a few minutes. Your goal really is to tailor the resume towards what the employer is looking for. So to start, if everyone that's on the call, and we're talking here today mainly about law firms, a couple of people raised their hands, so I'm going to call on them. I just put it in the chat too. Aaron, what are they looking for?
Hi there. I recently graduated law school, and I'm assuming that they're looking for some sort of relevant experience, either in a clerkship or in volunteering for the practice area that they're seeking to hire.
Okay, great. A clerkship, and what else? Oh, in the practice area?
Or volunteering, being part of some group.
Okay. Thank you, Aaron. And then Renee, did you have something that you wanted to say?
Yes, I am an attorney, but I have been in privacy most of my professional career and working for Fortune 500 companies. One thing that I have found that employers are really looking for is competence in a particular subject matter. Then second, which is sometimes missed, is how well that person's going to fit into their ongoing team and internal processes. Those two things that were important to me that I've seen.
All right. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. When I look at resumes and what I've developed from studying these first principles for quite a while of resumes, there's 5 things that employers are looking for. And I'll list those down. It's can you do the job that they have. 1 second here. Can you do the job? Will you do the job long term? And I'll discuss that in a few minutes. Can you be managed? Do you want the job? Do we like you? So again, let's talk about a little bit about can you do the job? Does anyone have any ideas about what that would be about? Can you do the job? Does anyone want to raise their hand? or put it in the Q&A chat. Yeah. So, well, can you do the job essentially means a bunch of different things. So most employers that are hiring you in a law firm typically have several different types of ways of telling if you can do the job. So employers, as you guys are all aware, and girls, typically fall into different types of prestige levels. So different types of prestige levels. Explain to you why that's important in a second. Prestige levels, and the prestige levels are based on your background and experience. So essentially what the prestige levels are, and when I say prestige levels, I don't really mean prestige levels in a negative sense, but what a prestige level is you typically have firms, candidates that are, you can rank them 1 to 5. And what a 1 means is it means you primarily have experience servicing individuals without large budgets or on contingency. And then the second one would be primarily individuals, small companies without budgets, often insurance companies and non-insurance companies supervised without in-house counsel. Meaning if they're small companies, they typically don't have in-house counsel. Then 3 would be primarily deep pocket individuals, small to medium companies, and medium companies with in-house counsel, likely have in-house counsel and day-to-day legal work. 4 are going to be medium to large companies with in-house counsel for day-to-day legal work. And then 5 would be largest companies, most sophisticated legal work, and bet the company work. So this is really the 5 types of firms that when someone looks at your resume, they decide what kind of bucket that you fall into. This is what all employers are doing, and it's what large legal employers are doing as well. But it's what large legal employers are doing as well. And so everyone is looking at your resume through these 5 boxes to see if you can do the job. These 5 different things, and I'll just keep talking about this Word document until the camera's frozen, is if you have experience servicing individuals, that means you're doing something. It could be trust in estates, it could be family law, it could be these are kind of consumer facing practice areas, which are trust in estates, family law, these sorts of things. Family law could be more than that, but if you have a resume that looks like you're primarily doing servicing individuals, it's going to basically, people are going to see things on there, DUI law, criminal law, things along those lines. And typically what happens, and this is not always a good thing, are depending on the law school you go to, people from the major law schools or the largest law schools typically do want to work in these kind of practice areas. Give me 1 second. Schools, not consumer facing, earlier in their career. And then later in their career, 1 second. Facing earlier in their career. And then later in their career, they may go into those. And then as you move up the line, people will work in law firms that do this. Now, these types of law firms, the 5 are going to be the most prestigious, best law students and so forth. And actually, even in schools like Yale and so forth, people do not always get into 5 firms. So it's not to say, and 4 firms are typically going to be your typical Am Law 100 to 200 law firm. 200. And then the majority of attorneys in the United States actually work in 1 to 3 firms. Let me see here. Medium firms, or medium-sized cities and that sort of thing. Cities, smaller, etc. Okay, and then individuals, same thing. These would be lower, the types of people that get jobs in that. So your resume will reflect, based on the way people are reading it, whether or not you can do the job. So this is how people start looking at your experience and how people start evaluating whether or not you can do the job. Depending on the type of firm you're applying to, if you don't have good grades and you're at a consumer-facing law firm that does all consumer, you're going to have a very difficult time going to work for a 3 to 5 firm many times. You sometimes can move up to a 2 firm. If you move up to a 2 firm and work for small companies, then you could often move to a 3 firm. But just keep in mind that anytime someone has in-house counsel that's supervising their legal work, what that means and the reason that's important and the reason I put that in there is because if in-house counsel is supervising legal work, what that means is it means that you are typically going to be working for the in-house counsel is looking over the attorneys working on their matters. They're going to want to make sure that it's a good attorney and so forth. So I'm going to come back to this in a second, but someone did raise their hand, so I want to see what they have to say. Let's see here. Tiffany. So, Tiffany, sorry. You have a question? Okay, I guess not. Let me see. Oh, West unmute. See if you had a question. Nope. Okay, so this is how you can do the job. So the first thing they're looking at is they're looking at what your experience says about you. So they're looking at whether or not, or what your law school says about you, and whether or not they can fit you in to one of these boxes, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Law firms typically have, give me 1 second here, sorry. We'll typically have different types of clients. And so the law firm you're applying to can often be ranked between a 1 and a 5. So on BCG, all the law firms that we look at are 1 to 5. So when you're applying to firms, they're asking if you can do the job, whether or not you win with what they're looking for in this 1 to 5 range. Does anyone have any questions about this? I just want to make sure that you guys understand this when you're applying to jobs. Any questions? You can raise your hand if you have any questions. Okay. Okay, so the next thing when you do the job is really then you're looking at the job description. So every job has a job description associated with it. And so when they're looking at the job description, essentially a job description is going to, when you read a job description on a website or on an employer's website, the job description will typically mention a job title, which will be associate counsel or associate partner counsel, whatever the part-time contract attorney, whatever the title is. And so that you'll have a job title, and then you'll have a job description. And then the description will typically ask for something related to your experience. So this is one of the things that's very important for every resume when you look at the description. And the reason the description is important is because your description needs to basically, of your experience, needs to talk about that your experience matches the job. So the way to understand that with your experience matching the job is if a law firm is looking for someone to do, let me just see here with us, share if I can. I wish this wasn't frozen like this, but if you're, let me just see here, 1 second. Surface camera. Oh, there we go. Looks like the camera's working now, but there's no, you guys can see a background. And then let's see here. Okay, this virtual camera, give me 1 second. Nope, camera's frozen. I think I'm gonna do it like this. And then give me 1 second. And then, sorry guys, I apologize for this. This is very embarrassing. Blur, let's see here. Nope, it's not working, none. Virtual, not good. Let's see here, video filters, none. Okay, green screen. Video, sorry, give me a second. All right, yeah, this is not good. But so your experience, let me just see here. This virtual camera, settings. Okay, so your experience, your description needs to talk about your experience to match the job. So what does that mean? So it's very important to understand a couple of different issues about law firm jobs. Most law firm jobs and a few issues about law firm, are looking for specialists. And so what a specialist is, if you choose about law firm jobs. A specialist is basically someone that does one practice area and sometimes more than one practice area, but typically they'll do one practice area. So a law firm may be searching for a corporate attorney to do M&A. A law firm may be searching for someone to do a certain type of litigation. And so they need to understand when they're looking at your background that you have the experience to do that work. And one of the things I would recommend everyone on this call do is I've done several webinars and they're on our website where we talk about different things related to how to write your resume and the kind of resume critiques and to look at them. But the idea is you typically have what a lot of attorneys do on their resumes is list everything that they've done. And that's not really that smart. If you're applying for a certain type of job, what you need to do is do you have a suggestion here? Or?
Maybe just stop share.
Stop share?
Yeah. Click on stop share then.
Okay, hold on 1 second, guys. Just want to try.
There, where I pointed.
Stop video?
Yes. Use that.
Okay, but nothing. Okay.
Yeah, use that instead.
Okay. All right.
And you'll see your document.
Yes. Okay.
You'll see it's
Okay.
live.
All right. Great.
And that's what
Thanks.
the audience is seeing.
All right. Great. Okay. So resumes need to list everything that you've done. And people will do that. And so the problem with listing everything that you've done is it makes you look like a generalist and not a specialist. And most law firms will hire specialists. And when you're writing if you're applying for a certain type of job, really what you want to do is you want to draw attention to how your recent experience, whether it was a clerkship or whatever you're doing, is a good fit for a specialist type of job. And that's really extremely important. Every job has a practice area associated with it. If you go to the BCG search site and you go to the homepage, you'll see we have about 350 different practice areas. And so when we're looking at your resume, what we're trying to do at BCG, for example, is we're trying to fit your experience into a box. And if we can't fit your experience into a box, it's very difficult for us to work with you because most of our clients are seeking a specialist. And if a law firm is looking for anything, you need to make sure that your resume reflects that. So that's one of the things that law firms are asking when they ask if you can do the job. They're asking whether or not where you fit into this role. So if you have a lot of experience working for individuals, you should be applying to firms primarily that do that, or you might be able to get that experience. If you're working for mid-sized companies, you want to apply to firms you could apply to firms that are doing, if you're working at a 3 firm, you can apply to firms that are doing the 4s. And if you're working at a 4 firm, you can apply to firms doing 5. So that's the biggest way to understand how kind of law firms are asking whether or not you can do the job. They're asking if your experience matches that, and if your stuff is related, if your current experience is related to that. Does anyone have any questions about can you do the job so far? I can answer. Okay. And if you do, just raise your hand. And the next question that people ask, very important, is will you do the job long term? So there's lots of ways for a law firm to tell if you can do the job long term. Does anyone have any ideas about how, and you can raise your hand if you do, how law firms can determine that? Okay. When a law firm is hiring people, someone raised their hand. So thank you, Aaron. Let me just see here. I'll call on Aaron. Okay. Let me see here. Okay, Aaron, let me see here.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
So I guess this is semi-answer, semi-question, which is,
right.
I'm concerned about the value of, let's say, content production. So would it be that if you're interested in doing something long-term and can do something, that blog posts or other media would aid you in being evidence of that?
So things that you've done, writing blog posts and things that are related to your practice area?
Yeah. So for example, I have a certification in privacy. Would producing media on privacy, like blog posts or video, help me show that I can do it and that I'm interested in doing it long term?
Absolutely. So that's a really good point, and exactly what you should be doing. Anyone that shows an interest in something, for example, if you're interested in privacy and you've gone and gotten your privacy certification, you've written blogs about it and things, then the idea is both that you'll probably do the job long term and be committed to it. Yes. So and think about it from the standpoint of an employer. If you had an opening for a privacy law attorney and you had someone that just applied and said they wanted to work there, and you had another person that showed a bunch of outside interest, you would probably hire the person that had a lot of interest and did a lot of independent stuff with them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So that's one of the ways that people will look at people for long term. So interest in the subject matter. Anything, other ideas you can think of? Aaron?
Yeah, I'm thinking short. So for somebody who's, inexperienced, like literally just passed the bar. So I'm still thinking about what could work. I had a career prior to this in video production, and what I found was a lot of networking events actually were helpful in showing that, because it builds connections. And generally speaking, especially in the entertainment industry, it's all about those connections. But I was trying to think about how I could parlay that into this type of specific thing.
Okay. Yeah. The long term, and just to give you everyone some kind of insight into what that is exactly, what the idea, and thanks, Aaron, for your comment. What long term means is when an employer is looking at your resume, it costs an employer a lot of money to bring someone in and train them. And it costs money to bring people in and train them. It also costs money, whether it costs money for new attorneys, new attorney training. It also costs money for attorneys that are hired in leave. And it costs money to hire people that are unlikely to stay for whatever reason. So law firms can often tell that you're likely to leave if they see a lot of outside interest and experience that is incompatible. So it's funny when you look at the people in the best law firms that make partner and so forth, some of them do, but the majority do not look that interesting on paper and are not that, a lot of them in person aren't that interesting. And there's nothing wrong with that. Law firms that are hiring people really want people at the junior level that they believe are going to stick around, and also at the senior level and the mid-level and whatever they're going to stick around. In order to see if someone's going to do something long-term, the ways that they can typically tell that are a history of long-term employment with a single employer, with employment with single employers. So if you had a history of long-term employment with a single employer prior to law school, they like that. If they think that if you're a new attorney and all you've ever wanted to do is practice law at a big law firm since you've been a young child or something, or your parents were attorneys, something that demonstrates to the employer that this is what you want to do, that's important to them. Making the ability that if you switch jobs a lot, they don't like to see that. So no one likes to hire people that have switched firms a lot or jobs in the past. They don't like that, or in the past. They don't like people that look like they're interested in other things. What Aaron said was a really good point. He's interested in data privacy and has done all this writing on it. And that actually makes him look like a very good candidate for someone to hire him for that. But one example would be someone that has done nothing but been always interested in the entertainment industry. This is very common, by the way. You see a lot of resumes of people that worked and been on the Entertainment Law Society, been in the entertainment club in college, then moved to Los Angeles and are working as a tax attorney somewhere. Anyone that hires them knows that person at some point is going to try to jump ship and go to work at an entertainment company or an entertainment law firm. That's just what people do when they have those types of interests. If someone's been, a lot of times I will place a lot of people in the healthcare industry with no experience working in a law firm, but they may have been in the healthcare industry prior to law school. Then they went to work in the healthcare industry after law school, maybe in a company or something. And then they want to work in a law firm. Law firms are likely to stick around and do that practice area in the long term. Law firms make money off you and are better off hiring people that are going to do the job long term. And so they need to see that in your resume. Now, some of the things that law firms don't like to see, that scare them, do not like to see. They don't like to see things like entrepreneurial experience. Now, that may sound something like they know that you're probably going to leave and do your own thing if you've been an entrepreneurial before. They don't like to see very strong interest in strong public interest, pro bono, all that sort of thing. They know that you'll probably leave and do that. Not that there's anything wrong with any of that, but it's not compatible with that type of employer. They don't like to see moving jobs. I brought that up. They don't like to see that. They don't like to see any type of interest in other subject matter that's incompatible, where you can make a living, subject matter where you can make a living. People that do things that have done things in the past or during law school, have started businesses or done anything related to, let me just fix this here, an outside business and things, the law firms know that you'll probably do that eventually. And then another thing that's interesting is a lot of law firms will intentionally, and I've written a lot about this before, and it tends to be a little bit of offensive to people, but people that do the job long term typically will have the belief that working in a law firm is, and again, I don't say this in a bad way, but working for someone else, working in a law firm is what you should be doing with your career in the long term. And it's a better option than other things. And you tend to be someone that will be a follower and look up to people in the law firm and that sort of thing. And I'll talk about that a little bit in the future. But those are things that the law firms like to see. They need you to be like a criticism of law firm. It's not a criticism of law firms. It's not a criticism of you or anybody that wants to be entrepreneurial. But they, as a business, they need people that will do the job long term. And so if you can convince a law firm that you really want to work hard and stay there and do a good job, then that's important. The problem when an attorney is hired and it wants to do something else, is that they typically will disengage long before they quit. Or they leave and they won't give their full effort. That means the clients won't get the best service. If they're someone that's going to do the job for a year or two, that means that the law firm's going to have to train them, and attorneys are going to have to take time away from billable hours to mark up their work and help them. And the person's just going to take those skills to another firm. So all this is very expensive, and you really make yourself look like a very good fit for the law firm if you can convince them that you're likely to stay there long term. It's also one reason I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention that when I talk about these different levels, like these 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 people, lots of people start out at 1 firm and end up at 4 firms. Some even make it to 5 firms. It's because if a law firm, someone starts out at a 1 firm, and there's nothing wrong with that, you can get a job later at a 2 firm because you'll say, hey, this is what I always wanted to do. I always wanted to move away from working with individuals. I really want to get some experience working with small companies. And regardless of your experience, if you really can convince a law firm, then people will hire you. Same thing with 2 firms. People move from 2 firms to 3 and 4 firms all the time by really looking committed. So your resume can give that feeling if you've been in a similar practice setting, if you've been in a certain market a long time. All that stuff can be helpful. One of the things that's interesting about doing the job long term that I just wanted everyone to understand is one of the things that I talk about a lot, and people do follow my advice, but is that it's very important if you want to do the job long term to often, and one of the best ways to get hired is to, if you're from a certain market that's smaller than where you're working, or even another market that's larger, with the exception of a few markets, which would be your 10 largest markets, anytime you're moving home to a market, so say you're working in Phoenix and you want to move home to, I don't know, San Antonio or something, then law firms in San Antonio are going to believe that this person's settling down. This is where they're from. They're going to stay. They're going to do this work long term. This is what they want to do. Whereas if you're just moving to another firm in Phoenix, the law firm's going to think maybe there were some problems and stuff with this person. So doing the job long term is a thing for the law firm that can come across in your resume. And some other problems with resumes that people make that shows you can't do the job long term. So sometimes people might have had 4 or 5 jobs, which is nothing wrong with that, but current job may be doing trademark work. Last job might be IP litigation, general, I don't know, but general, just all types of stuff. Job before that might be for the corporate or something. And these are very common things that I see in resumes all the time. So if someone has a resume that reads like that, then the law firm's thinking this person's just bouncing around. They're likely to not do this job long term. They're probably going to try something else. And so the best way to handle that would be to talk about anything related to trademark, to de-emphasize your experience in your last jobs and really highlight trademark, because otherwise it's going to look like you're just constantly bouncing around and unlikely to stick around with anything. Law firms they don't want to be experimental grounds for you figuring out what you want to do. They really want to make sure that if you go to work there, that you're likely to stick around. And so that information can come across on your resume. Again, applying to deciding what type of attorney you want to look like. If you have experience working for individuals and small companies and you want to work in a 3 firm, you would go and you would emphasize to make it look that you were probably working, you would talk more about the company work in order to get into the 3 firm and so forth. And those are things that can help you. So the next one is long term. Then the next one is, can you be managed? This is a big one too. And I'm sure that everyone knows of a lot of examples of people that can't be managed, but does anyone want to give me some examples or ideas about, you can either put it in the question and answers and chats, or you can put it in, you can raise your hand and answer if anybody wants to volunteer. Otherwise, I'll just start talking. Okay, so can you be managed essentially means what it says. Law firms, again, and I talked about this earlier, there's soldiers and then there's generals. And someone that can't be managed, typically the resume will read a lot about their accomplishments, and which is okay, but it'll read a lot about their accomplishments and things that they may have done as an individual. they may have done as an individual, which is okay. Again, I'm not criticizing this, but I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail. But it will also often be political in nature. So it'll be political in nature, and we'll reference groups and points of view that may be off-putting to some people, to some people in groups. And it will give the impression that those opinions and groups are more important than the firm or where the person is working. So I'll tell you a couple funny examples, and then I'll get a little bit more serious. So I had a candidate years ago that was a college football player, then went to a top 3 law school, which it doesn't matter which one, maybe even a top 1 law school, then became a partner in a major AmLaw 100 law firm. And his resume was littered with all his love of football and all this stuff he'd done in college. It had a whole big paragraph of his love of football. And then even his extracurricular activities were all about football, and his just all about football. And he was become a partner in an AmLaw 100 law firm, and then was offered an opportunity to go back to this big, top 20 college and program and be a coach, and decided he was going to take a leave of absence from his law firm to become an assistant coach at the law firm the school for a year. And left all his clients, and the law firm just took all his clients, and when he wanted his job back, wouldn't give him his job back. And not only that, but he couldn't get a job after that for a long time. This is an example of can you be managed, and someone who's experienced, which is, I think, an interest in football is a very healthy thing. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but it was so healthy that it was more important to him than his clients and practicing law in one of the top 50 largest law firms in the country, or maybe even bigger than that. So people will do that on their resumes all the time. They'll think that stuff that they've done is very important. And certainly that his football was important, but it was more important to him than his experience. Or more important than his job. So people will do this all the time. The most common way people will do it a lot of times is, it's very funny. I've started seeing all these resumes, and if you're doing this, please don't do it, because it won't get you hired. Of these people that are very angry that they're not working, and they can't get jobs. And a lot of times they tend to be, a lot of them are in New York for whatever reason, but there'll be these resumes where the person will have been at a major law firm, like a top 10, 20 law firm, and it will have all this discussion of their pro bono experience. So the resume might be this long with their experience, or it might be a paragraph of their experience. We'll talk all about all this pro bono work they did, represented this person, did this and this. And then we'll say, also worked in project finance and helped with this. And so the idea is that someone that looks like that probably can't be managed. The pro bono is more important than their job. Law firms are businesses, and they want to be able to manage you. And there's nothing wrong with being interested in pro bono, but that's a personal thing. It's like being interested in going out and drinking expensive whiskey on Friday night. It's people think it's interesting, but it detracts from what the law firm needs, as soldiers. It'd be like a soldier in an army saying, what I'm really interested in doing is, something completely unrelated it doesn't help the group. So again, there's nothing wrong with doing pro bono. Lots of people do pro bono, but emphasizing that experience is likely to give law firms that idea. Other times people will put on all these political activities. So obviously, in a lot of big cities, if you put down that you're very interested in Republican politics or anything like that, it could hurt you. And the same goes, which people don't realize, with other party politics too, whether it's, who knows, because people will often assume that you come with those points of view built in, whether it's unionization or whatever, of having that political party and stuff on your resume, or very strong interest outside of that. And it could be political, it could be something else. And of course, people want differences in viewpoints and things, but you have to ask yourself, do they hire for that? And you have to be very careful, because in my experience, there becomes a line where it's crossed. And I do feel, and I will just say that, again, this comes from watching tens of thousands of people and what happens to them with different stuff on their resume is it can hurt you. So you want to look like you can be managed. So having a resume that highlights things that may make it look like that's going to push you in a certain direction could be hard. Other things that give law firms the ability, the understanding of whether or not it can be managed is, and I'm not telling you you're wrong for thinking any of these things, but a desire to work, moving for higher compensation when not that much, when there's not a lot of money. It could be negotiating, asking about, taking time about, asking about and trying to work reduced hours right away, having lots of complaints and interviews, having lots of movement on your resume. Let me just see here. Lots of movement. Sorry, which is related to what I've already talked about. Movement on your resume. And then you would also have having owned businesses in the past. That makes it often very difficult in the past. And then one other thing is, it's interesting, there's not appearing for everything. Know everything and are completely competent in everything. So it's very interesting. And I've noticed this throughout my career. It's the people that tend to be the best at their jobs. And the higher up you move on the food chain, the more people are willing to admit what they don't know and are teachable. So your resume needs to look like you're teachable and willing to learn. And how does that come across? I see resumes all the time where people will just completely brag and will say, first person to ever get 100 out of 100 on an exam. And that's okay. But you have to be very careful and you have to look like you're teachable. And people that don't look like they're teachable are often unmanageable. People that you have to look like you're manageable. And being manageable means willing to follow instructions, willing to learn, willing to do things that are not questioned and all sorts of things. And this is very hard to talk about because it's offensive to a lot of people and it detracts from what it means often to work for other people. Being manageable, what does that mean? So I'll give you a couple of examples of people that I've seen in my career that weren't manageable and what happened to them. And I guess what I can talk about are just a few first-year associates that I saw lose their jobs in the firms I was working in. In the first firm I worked in, there was a guy that was valedictorian from probably a top 10. It was a top 10 law school then. I don't think it is anymore, but top 10 law school. He was first in his class. And he thought it was a very big deal. And he was like the editor-in-chief of the Law Review. And he decided that he knew more than the people he was working for and started doing things like giving quotes to the press about which he was volunteering, about cases he was working on and telling partners that they were wrong about stuff. And pretty much everyone just stopped giving him work. And within 6 months, he was out of his first job and became a solo practitioner. That's 6 months. Yeah, about 6 months. And so that's someone that was not manageable. Someone who thought they were so important, they knew more than everyone and that sort of thing. That's one example. Another example I can think of someone that was not manageable was an attorney who was very sad. He was at the very top of his class at a top 2 law school and probably one of the top 5 students in his graduating class. And he was given all these assignments and one particular assignment was given by a junior partner. And he told the junior partner there was no need to do it after examining it, that this was the answer. There was no need to do any further research or work on it. And he was done. And that guy also lost his job. And as a first-year associate, it was very sad because he had a very tough family life and became very deprived. Anyway, so being manageable is very important. And you need to look like on your resume that you're manageable, meaning that you're the sort of person that can be managed. And it's also with interviews. You need to look like you're manageable. And if you don't, then people won't hire you. So being manageable means looking like you're someone that the law firm that will be managed. And I'm sure everyone that's listening to this or watching this right now understands lots of examples about people that can't be managed and how that creates issues. Another kind of sign of management, and I hate to bring this up, but I'm going to bring it up, is people that are not manageable often will be more concerned with what others are doing and getting, concerned with what others are doing and getting than their own job. So I've been in, and again, I'm don't like bringing this up, but I'm going to. I've been doing this work for over a long time, decades. And one of the things that I've noticed and that partners have said to me and that I've seen throughout my career, it was funny, one of the first websites I ever advertised on and I think I might have bought that I advertised on was a Greedy Associates type website. And a lot of people use that. And there's always been websites like that where people go and gossip about their law firms and what other people are doing and what the things that are going on those websites. And again, very interesting, I'm not criticizing you for looking at them. But one of the things that 25 years ago, partners said to me, and even currently they said to me, because there's always been these sites and there always will be ones like this where people go and read gossip about bonuses and things, which again is interesting. I'm not criticizing you for doing it, but people that tend to focus on what others are getting and that sort of thing often are very difficult for law firms to manage. And so really just being more concerned about the work that's in front of you is often much more helpful in terms of that and makes it, because the management, being able to be managed, I don't like talking about this, but it's what it means when you're working for someone else. And it's really the main reason a lot of times that associates don't get jobs and also lose their jobs in law firms, and partners as well, people that are unable to be managed. Partners, by the way, are often unable to be managed. And it's very common, especially, it's funny when I was writing an article the other day about all these law firms that have gone out of business. And typically what happens with partners is a lot of times partners will always move because they just can't be managed. They don't want people telling them what to do. They don't like their compensation being set by someone else or whatever the issue is, and will leave because of that. So partners also can be very difficult to manage. And typically when a law firm goes out of business, not always, but a lot of times they've hired a lot of lateral partners and things, and those partners can't be managed. And so suddenly you have a whole firm that can't be managed. And so being able to be managed is very important. Okay, then the next one, and if anybody has any questions, we'll also take a lot of questions after this, but if anybody at any point has any issues or things that they want to discuss with these points, let me know. And there's actually 6 of them, but I'll just cover 5 real quickly. So the next one is, do you want the job? So wanting a job means a lot of things. So people talk about networking and wanting the job. People talk about all sorts of things about what do you want, who wants the job? And I have some pretty simple secrets that I've followed in terms of making placements throughout the years. And I'll go into those in a second. But wanting the job really means a lot of things. So I'll tell you a couple of quick stories. The first was, this is something, and this is not related, but when I was very young, I got my first dog. And when we were leaving, my mom was like, well, why did you pick up the dog you picked out? And I said, it's because it was a dog that first ran up to me and was spent all her time like nice to me. And so that was how I picked it. So I picked the dog that liked me the most. And it's the same thing with a lot of times with our relationships. Who do we get involved in? If we're healthy, a lot of times we're maybe not healthy, we get involved with the people that like us the most. We tend to stay and work with the people that like us the most. And so employers are the same way. If somebody really wants the job, then we're more likely to hire them than if they don't want the job. And so anybody that wants the job, that gives the employer a real reason to want to hire them. I have seen some exceptional people at getting jobs throughout the years, very exceptional. Over the past 25 years, I've watched very good attorneys manipulate me to get jobs, to work for their firm, to recruit for their firm. To the ones that are the best at it are typically the ones that really want the job and have something special to offer. And and we'll talk about this in terms of how it applies to your resume, but what do the best attorneys do to get clients? What do the best attorneys do to get jobs? And really what they do is they're able to connect with people in a way that shows them, this place is really freaking special to me. This stuff that you do, it's exactly what I do. So-and-so is committed to it. I really want them. I really think that they're amazing. I've studied this. It means something to me. And people get into schools this way. They get jobs this way. They getting into a school. How do you get into a school? If you get into a school and you have the attention, you have reasons to the school that go far beyond your grade point and your other things that make it very clear why you want it. And often it's because you've been able to network with people at the employer, or your experience is a perfect fit, or your background. but you make people understand that you want something and you really want it. So again, going back to the secret of when I'm placing people, one of the secrets that I have is I will ask all my candidates after an interview, if you get an offer here, would you accept it? And if they say yes, you tell the firm that this person really wants to work there. They will, if you give them an offer and you get the compensation and everything is good, they will accept the job. And that closes more job interviews than anything, because the average person gets an interview, the law firm is waiting for signals many times. If it's a great law firm that everyone wants to work in, they'll assume you want to work in there. But if you have really convincing reasons for wanting to work there, then they will hire you. I had a case once, it was interesting, it was years ago. And the person it was a very sad story. The person was funny, but they were working as a personal injury solo practitioner or DUI solo practitioner in Los Angeles. And then one day they saw an ad that this Japanese law firm was coming to town to interview people. And if you wanted, you could show up at this hotel suite and they would interview you to work at their firm in Japan on this date and time. And so he showed up and hardly anybody showed up. And they hired him to work in Japan for a fairly low paid job. So he had taken the train 2 hours a day. And he wasn't Japanese. He was from Minnesota or something. But anyway, after several years there, he just couldn't take it anymore. And he wasn't making money. He married a Japanese wife, was taking this train and then just not having a very good time living in a one-room apartment with a baby. And so he contacted me and he was actually doing corporate related work. So I thought, this is interesting. And I managed to get him some interviews in the United States because the corporate market was very active at the time. But the problem is he didn't have a great personality. He just didn't know how to connect with people. He might have been competent enough, but he didn't connect with interviewers. And so he couldn't voice the things he was thinking. I don't know if nerdy is the word, but he just didn't seem interested in the subject matter, nothing. So one of the firms that I had a lot of contacts with was a mid-sized firm I'd gotten him an interview with in Los Angeles. I initially scheduled the interview with him with a partner that had been in Tokyo. And I found out the partner was in Tokyo. I was like, you should interview this guy. And the partner gave him a lot of pep talks before he went and interviewed him. And he did very well with the in-person interview. But then he came back to the United States and interviewed. And all of his reviews, I found out after, were horrible. And not horrible, but just, again, no interest, flat, monotone, just didn't connect with the interviewers. And so I said to him, I was like, okay, I need you to be at my office at 8 a.m. on Saturday, and we're going to spend the entire day writing each of your interviewers and telling them why you want the job, it's very important to you, how it would change your life, why it's important. And this was a law firm that paid top of market. And at the time, he was making maybe $30,000 a year in Japan. And it was crazy. And this firm would have paid him like $150 or something. And anyway, so he wrote these notes and we didn't finish them until 11 o'clock at night. I didn't write them for him. I had him write them and then I had him rewrite them and write them again, but it made them very persuasive. And so he wrote these follow-up notes. And typically I do not recommend writing thank you notes all the time, but he wrote them. And they were at the level where people were reading them and crying. I found out from the firm later, and he got an offer because he looked like he wanted the job. So you have to, and which just completely changed his life and the direction of his career and so many nice things. And then I think they might have even paid to move his futon over from Japan. But the point is that if you want the job, law firms will hire you, even if there's better candidates. And so how do you look like you want the job? You look like you want the job by personalizing your resume to the job that's advertised. That's one thing. I, at BCG, will coach people to make their resume focused on the type of practice area they're in, but your resume really needs to be focused on the type of practice area that you're in and make it look like you want the job. So if you're applying to a certain type of firm and your resume has very good information that discusses why you would be a good fit for the job and is aimed towards that practice area and uses keywords related to the practice area. There's all sorts of guides on BCG that talk about practice areas, and they will talk about if you do a search for the practice areas, there'll be keywords there and all sorts of things. But applying for a certain type of firm, if you're applying for a job that the firm has, making sure that your resume and so forth looks that way and is personalized for that employer is important. Also, your cover letter is extremely important because your cover letter can go into details about why you want the job. You can talk about what the firm does, why you've always wanted to work there. I got a job once. It was funny. It was at a firm called Dewey Ballantyne. And my grandfather had been in the same fraternity or something as Dewey, who was the founder of the firm, in college at the University of Michigan. And he'd always told me, or his father actually, not me, that wouldn't it be great to work in this firm? I know this guy. It'd be awesome if one of my relatives could work there. And so I went into an interview, and one of the first person I interviewed with, I told them that, and they beamed, and it was just like basically got the job. So wanting the job is very important. And if there's a way that you can convince people of that on your resume, it will help you quite a bit. And so that's one of the ways that people can tell that from the resume. And then other ways you can do that many times, again, are through networking, telling people that you want the job, that your cover letter and so forth. But people are going to believe that you want the job if your resume is very focused as well. And then some of the other things that are important for a resume are making yourself likable. So how do you make yourself likable on a resume? And just think about it, how you would view it. So if you're a liberal and you're viewing someone's resume and they have a bunch of stuff on there about how conservative, you have a bunch of, you're reviewing the resume and a bunch of how conservative they are, you're automatically going to reach all sorts of negative conclusions about them. If you see someone's resume and they're applying for a certain type of job and things on their resume that turn you off, you're not going to like them. So people can tell if they like you or not from your resume. So sometimes there's ways to make your resume better, and by eliminating a lot of things that may make you not likable. Things that make people many times not likable are about accomplishments and not just maybe listing them, making yourself seem like you're better than other people in ways that may not be conducive with certain law firm's interests. Sometimes having hobbies and things on your resume can be fun. Things like cooking or simple types of things can be helpful, but just think about what kind of people do you like? What kind of people do you not like? Now, the things that you want to be known for that are important to you will often be good to put on there, but just remember, if you're applying to certain types of firms, you can often make yourself unlikable. And so you need to be very careful about that. But this was just, I wanted to go through these things with everyone just so you understood a lot of the things about how an employer views your resume and what they're asking. There's some other things that are important that I did want to list under some of the stuff about whether or not you can do the job. Typically, when someone's looking at your resume, there's some very simple things that you need to do. So I had an instance once where I had applied to a law firm, and there was a date typo on my resume. And actually, I hadn't made the date typo. It was funny. It was a recruiter that had made the date typo. They had retyped my resume for some reason because I didn't have a version, and I'd faxed it to them. It was a long time ago. And a law firm that interviewed me literally was so upset by it, they were not going to make me an offer until it was explained. So typos, proofreading, and things will often show that you can't do the job to certain types of firms. If you don't do that, I recommend everyone use proofreading programs on their resume, and to make sure you do that and review things for typos and all that sort of thing, because making sure that you proofread the resume is extremely important. Lots of people do not get jobs because of proofreading. I would say anytime I run a resume through proofreading program, it's always finding errors. And a lot of these errors are things you would not expect. There's rules about when you write down a number on your resume as opposed to spelling out the number. There's rules about hyphens. There's rules about putting commas and titles and periods after employer names versus not, and how to, all these rules that you wouldn't know if you weren't running things through programs. So when you turn in something that has all that, certain types of law firms are automatically going to disqualify you. And you might not even know why, but when they see those things, because it just makes it look like you may not be at a level that they're expecting in terms of that. So that's one thing that can often show you can't do the job. Doing the job long term, I'm just trying to think, just to look at some notes. Again, will often be highlighting experience that's not relevant, being managed. Let me just see here. One other thing about management too that I think is very important is just the format of your resume. The format of your resume should be very simple. And when I see simple, the resume should not You shouldn't be using special colors and that sort of thing on it. You shouldn't be giving indications of something that it shouldn't be trying to get people's attention in a way that kind of detracts from a standard resume. So the better off you do with that, the better off you'll be in terms of that. One other thing too, I wanted to just talk about briefly, and these are not that important, but I do want to bring this up to you, is it's funny, like I read articles, like I get legal articles about attorneys that have been arrested or committed crimes and things all the time. And so sometimes I'll look them up because I want to see if this person ever applied to BCG like 15 years ago or something. I'll look up. And I always notice it's very unusual, but I've always noticed a lot of these people have PO boxes. I'm like, why do these people that are convicted of committing crimes all have PO boxes? And I've noticed it a lot. So I'm just saying, and then I even thought like attorneys that I've known, I worked in a firm, the first firm I worked at, 3 or 4 people years later, over the course of a long time, were arrested for doing various things. And I remember thinking, why do they have PO boxes in the firm directory, which used to be a printed thing? I think anytime you don't give identifying information, it can hurt you. I think if you want to put your address down, that's fine. When you talk about do we like you, one of the things that I would keep off there to make people like you are things like private schools. People do not like that. A lot of times, fancy neighborhoods you live in, if you live in a really good area of New York or whatever, or you live in a very expensive area of Los Angeles or something, that can upset people. So you want to often leave that stuff off there as well. And then often just using, I don't know, but those are some of the kind of the major things that I recommend. So can you be managed? But just make sure I got all these. Can you be managed? Can you do the job? Will you do the job long term? Okay. All right. I think that's about it in terms of this resume, things that I really wanted to say. And what I'd like to do next is take a quick break. And then when I come back, we can go through questions that you guys may have or girls may have on all this. Some of the questions I think that are the things that I just believe are the most important about being able to get a position with your resume are anytime you're highlighting whatever type of work that you do, try to focus and think about focusing hopefully on one thing. Doing the job means having typically experience in whatever the job opening is. Now, there are firms, they're not common, but there are firms that are looking for a generalist. If a firm is looking for a generalist, then that's fine. You can have a generalist resume. But most law firms are not impressed by you doing lots of different things. They may be impressed if you're a litigator of doing some different types of litigation, but they're not going to be impressed about you doing a lot of different things. They don't like a corporate attorney that also does litigation. They don't like a patent attorney that also does tax. It's just how it is. So they want to hire people that are experts, and there's just a lot of reasons for that. So your resume needs to look like an expert. One of the things too that is interesting, and I'm trying to give you guys and girls as many examples as I can because I want you to succeed. But one of the things that I've noticed that's happened to me, when I was in college, I remember I got an interview with this company. It was called Naderhofer Trading or something. And it was a very famous trader that came to my college and interviewed 50 people. And the actual Naderhofer came and then only brought back 2. And it was a very desirable job to get because people could make a couple $100,000 a year. This was a long time ago, right out of college, working for this guy. And so I went in and on my resume, and this is how employers still look at resumes, I had all of this. I'd written a book about, I don't know, race relations in Detroit or something. And I had a lot of discussion about that. All my classes were related to this kind of stuff. All my interests and clubs and things were related to social organization, betterment organizations and things. And so one of the traders there just took a look at my resume and goes, listen, I don't know why this guy brought you back, but you just look exactly like someone going to law school. There's really no point to continue this interview. And he was right. What a horrible mistake it would have been made hiring me for that job. The point is, if you're hired, can you do the job means your resume needs to look like this is what you should be doing. And so if you're interviewing for a certain type of job, you need to just look at it from the employer's point of view. And the whole concept of first principles, which is Aristotle, means stripping everything down to its essentials and making sure that those essentials are reflected in your background and to what the employer is looking for. Because essentially the employer just wants someone that can do the job, that's going to show up follow instructions, be managed, stick around, take criticism, that wants the job and that they like. And being likable means trying to fit in and flying with the people that you're talking with and so forth. But that's, can you do the job? And then doing the job long term. I think I talked about that. Just think about you interviewing people. I'd like to give an example of people hiring a nanny for their house, because a lot of people, attorneys, will hire nannies while they're at work, or they'll hire babysitters and things. So if you hire someone, all their experience is fixing cars, and they say, now I want to be a nanny, that to you is probably not going to, you're just going to be like, no, like I wouldn't hire this person. If someone's resume looks like maybe you want to hire someone, maybe you travel back and forth to Europe for work, and you're there weeks at a time, and you need someone to watch your kids. Is that going to be the kind of person you're going to want to hire that's going to stick around if they've had a job every 3 or 4 months? So just think about it from the employer's point of view. The employer wants someone that's going to stick around long term and looks committed. So they can pick that up from there. And again, people are going to pick up your interests based on what's on your resume. And then being able to be managed, think about that the same way. If someone has things on their resume that suggest that they don't want to be managed, or they're more comfortable not being managed, which is a lot of people. There's nothing wrong with that. That's going to detract from it. And then wanting the job, again, I talked a lot about that, but looking like this is the type of job you'd want to do. You're not just applying for a random job is very important. And then being likable is also important. And likable, by the way, also means, can you fit in and can you do well there? Now, people can fit in and be likable in different ways. So I'm going to tell you a white guy's story, and I don't mean this in not in a necessarily good way, because this is, again, a long time ago. But I remember the first offer that I got from a law firm was, I went to University of Virginia for law school, and I interviewed with this law firm in New York. It was a big law firm at the time. I think it's out of business, called Reed and Priest. But I went out to lunch with these guys, and I didn't think my interviews went particularly well. But I interviewed with these guys, and I remembered when I was at Virginia, there were all these people from Washington Lee, and they've been part of these like drinking fraternities or something, and got branded. And so I went out to lunch with these guys, and they had all 3 of them had gone to Washington Lee, and I started bringing up that I had some friends who were in these drinking fraternities, and not friends, or people that I knew actually in law school. And these guys had all been in them, and then they showed me their ankles where they'd been branded, and they're like, we definitely need to hire you. So this is an example of bonding with people over something pretty bizarre, but that makes people, if you can find commonalities with people, they like you. So people like people from certain schools, they like people that are like them, they like people with shared interest, and this can create problems for many people from different types of groups. I'm not saying this is a positive thing all the time, but this is something that you do, if you are liked by the people that you're interviewing with, can help you quite a bit in getting jobs. And it's something that I believe is important. So finding commonalities with people, asking about pictures on their desk, shared interests, things along those lines. I remember, and then I'll take a break after this for just a few minutes for questions. But I remember when I was just starting in this business, it was 2001, and it was really the worst corporate market I've ever seen for corporate attorneys. And there'd been so much overhiring when all these .com companies started and stuff of corporate attorneys, and that just so many people were pushed out on the market, and everyone was paranoid. There was no deal work or anything. But there was one firm, Morrison and Forrester in Denver, that had an opening, and so they were getting hundreds of applications it was insane. Just to give you a sense of how bad the market was at the time, we were getting 10 or 15 resumes from corporate attorneys probably every hour, and they were good. They were people that have been laid off from Ivy League schools, from the top firms all over the country. And we had one recruiter working for us that couldn't believe that these people were not placeable. And he ended up losing probably 30 pounds, and he was not heavy to begin with, in the course of 3 or 4 months trying to place all these people, and became so frustrated he had a little bit of a nervous breakdown and quit, and which I don't blame him. It was very hard. So the point is that we had one person interview in this Denver job, and the guy went in, and he wasn't from Denver, and they could have hired plenty of people from Denver, and he went in, and the partner he interviewed with was a very devoted skier, but I don't know what it's called, not skiing, it's called I don't know it's not a snowboarder. It was a very devoted snowboarder and really liked it and did it all the time. And that guy that interviewed was also a snowboarder. not only that, he'd been like a champion nationally or something, and just completely connected with a guy. And the firm called us and they're like, he has to hire him because he's a snowboarder. So people identify with you, and based sometimes on things on your resume, they will like you many times because of your politics. So if your politics is right, they may like you, but they'll also like you for reasons that you can connect with them. And if your resume can connect with people and make them like you, that's important. So just think about, do you like this person, or would you like this person? Ask other people to look at your resume that way as well. I hope all that stuff helps. And again, I'm sorry I wanted to do a webinar, but I thought that a webinar I had a PowerPoint prepared, but I really felt this stuff is the kind of approaching things this way is more important. I would love to, any questions anyone has when we come back, whether about this or anything else, any other questions you have, but I do think I'm looking at your resume and experience through these 5 lenses is something that can help you quite a bit, because this is really how employers review them. This is how I view them, and it can make a huge difference if you look at your resume that way. And again, the resume makes just massive difference. I've looked at hundreds of thousands of resumes, and it's something that can make a big difference. And oh, by the way, if anybody wants to put their resume in chat without your name on it or something, I can open it up during this call. I'd be happy to, if I can look at it somehow, critique it without your name on it, and give you some input as well before the webinar is over, but happy to do that. Okay, I will be back in a few minutes, and take a break. Thanks. So let's get started. So we'll go to the questions. Let me see here. Okay, so the first question is, someone said here, is 2 questions. How can you show your resume that you want to move from one employer prestige into a 4, for example? And then what if you're trying to break into a new field and you do not have experience in that area? How can your resume display that? Okay, so typically in terms of the prestige levels, that's a good question. In terms of moving up in prestige levels, it's been my experience, I'll give you one second here, that in terms of moving up prestige levels, you really, it's very difficult to move up in a prestige level from a 1 to a 4, for example. If you're at a 1 firm doing lower budget consumer related work, which is okay, then the best you're going to do in most cases is to move to probably a 2 firm, and then from there you can move to a 3 firm. And that's how people do it. Now, I'm not saying, I've had instances before where I've moved someone from a 2 firm to a 4 firm, or even from a 3 to a 5 firm, but it's very rare. What's more common is a 1 to a 2 and 2 to a 3. And so I've seen people, and just to give you some examples, I had one candidate that graduated from, I don't know, really good guy, graduated from, I think, Michigan Law School, or was it Michigan? I think it was Michigan, and failed the bar 2 or 3 times, and I didn't get an offer as a summer associate. He started at a 1 firm, or maybe a 2 firm, and did very well there and worked very hard for 2 or 3 years, moved to a 3 firm, then moved to a 4 firm, and then eventually moved to a 5 firm. And so it's definitely to do. It's not something that it's definitely possible to do, and something that a lot of people do, but you have to pretty much move slowly. And the reason moving from a 2 to a 3 firm is typically a little bit more difficult than moving from 1 to 2 is because a lot of times those firms have in-house counsel, and the in-house counsel is really closely looking at who's being hired and who's working on their matters. So if all of a sudden someone that has experience just working for individuals is working on a company's matters, and at a 3 firm, the company's going to be like, what the heck's going on here? And whereas if you had a background doing a lot of work for small companies at a 2 firm, you would do a 3 firm, then the firm would justify it by saying, this person did all this type of work in this practice area and they have all this experience, and then the in-house counsel would be like, that's great. So that's how that works. One of the reasons, by the way, and I don't necessarily believe in this, but one of the reasons that the highest paying firms, it's very difficult to get jobs with them, and is because they have to impress not just their staff and their attorneys with the quality of attorneys that they hire, but they also have to impress outside counsel. The way it typically works when a law firm's hiring someone or putting them on a matter, they'll say, Misty is a graduate of this law school where she was did this and this, and we hired her from this other big firm, or she comes to us, that something along those lines. Or you don't even have to go to the best law school in the country. You might have gone to like a top 250 school, but then they want to say, this person was number 6 in their class out of 100 students. They need to say something to justify hiring you and having you work on their matters. That is all. And because the law firm is accountable, the best, highest paying law firm are accountable not only to their employees, but their outside clients. I saw something once that was sad. It was an attorney that I knew pretty well, and he had started out going to unaccredited California law school, and then after going to that unaccredited California law school, he had gotten a series of degrees over 5 or 6 years while not working. And the last one was from Harvard, and then he was hired in the Los Angeles office of a giant New York law firm. And he got there and no one would give him any work because they figured out that what had happened and the other associates weren't very nice to him and that sort of thing. But had he started off at maybe a smaller firm and done really well there and become an expert and then moved up, it probably would have been different. And that's exactly what he did, by the way. He left that New York firm and went to work at a mid-sized LA firm and just knocked it out of the park, and then developed a big book of business and then moved to a larger firm after that. So that's how law firms think about that. Now, breaking into a new legal field is your next question, which is also a very good one. Let me just see here. So you're trying to break into a new legal field and you don't have experience in that area. How can your resume display that you do the job and you want the job? So law firms are very nervous about hiring people that aren't from a certain practice area. So in order to do that, you typically need to move down in prestige quite a bit, whereas you can move from a 1 firm to a 2 firm and a 2 firm to a 3 firm. You might have to move from a 4 firm to a 2 firm in order to get into another practice area. The reason is it creates all sorts of doubts from the firm. The way to think about it is through this matrix again. Can you do the job if you don't have the experience and they have no way of knowing, right? They don't know if you can do the job. And if you're trying to break into another practice area, most people that try to go into other practice areas are going to the practice area because they're unhappy practicing law and all sorts of things and hoping that a new practice area will make them happy. Most of the time, they won't do the job long term. Can you be managed? They're doubtful. Maybe you won't commit to that practice area or have any reason to commit. And then do you want the job? You may want the job, but they don't know if you'll stick around either. And then do we like you? Or they may like you, but they have no incentives. You can certainly move to other areas and so forth, but it's much more difficult. Okay, so this next one is regarding a cover letter. If you're unemployed at the moment, how do you, regarding a cover letter, if you're unemployed at the moment, how do you talk about yourself? Do you refer to your last tenure role? Yeah, lots of people are unemployed. People are laid off. They may have left their job for family reasons. There's all sorts of reasons. What I typically recommend in terms of talking about why you're unemployed is not talking about it. It's going to be asked in the interview. You're better off being asked that question in person many times after you had a chance to make a connection. Even if you were fired, the idea is that most employers, if they bring you in for an interview, want to hire you. They're really looking for reasons for you to disqualify yourself once you bring that in. You can just say, my most recent position was with this job where I did this and this. If you have references there, you can certainly give them, but you often, if you're unemployed, you don't really want to give a lot of information. And the reason is just because then you allow people to disqualify you based on that if they don't like those reasons. And many times when you're talking to people in person, they're seeing a different person and a different experience related to that. Okay, the next question is, does it matter? So give me a second here. Does it matter to have relevant experience for an entry-level position? And no, but your resume needs to look, you're the type of person that would be happy doing that job. You need to look like a good fit for what they're looking at. The only things that the law firm really has to gauge you on, especially for an entry level, are what you did in the summers, what you did before law school, what you studied before law school, and what your interests are. And then how you did in law school. And then where you went to law school. So that's really the only things that a law firm can evaluate you on prior to for an entry-level position. So it's very important, and for this is just for all law students maybe on this call, it's very important to get relevant experience. It's very important to get experience in a law firm. So your first summer, you can do things like work for a judge. It's pretty easy to get a job, for example, volunteering to work in a federal judge's chambers or the Justice Department or a law firm or sometimes. But it's very important to get some sort of summer job your first summer that's going to position you to get a job in your second summer. If you want to work in a law firm, it's very important, extremely important after your second summer, to get a job in a law firm doing something. That something should be related to the practice area you want to do, hopefully in the location you want to work at, and you should get a job with the best firm possible. If you can't get a job in a law firm, most people can, but assuming you weren't able to get a job in a law firm, then you should try to even volunteer in a law firm to do something and show an interest in something, because people are going to hire people that have an interest in something, and preferably in a certain location. And that's going to set you up for stuff. Now, so that it's just very important to try to get a summer job. So I see resumes all the time of people that are federal law clerks, like they're working in a federal district clerk, but they've never had a law firm job. I see resumes of people doing all sorts of things. And those resumes, from my perspective, are often very difficult to get jobs for, because the person has no law firm history. Law firms want to hire people that look like they want to work in a law firm, that are likely to do it long term, that show an interest in it. So the summers are important. I really do urge everyone to do your absolute best to get summer law firm jobs. It makes it a lot easier, regardless of whether or not you get an offer. Just getting some sort of law firm job, it will get you hopefully another law firm job later on. I've seen people, by the way, you can even go to work for a solo practitioner. I've seen people get jobs as solo practitioners in their summers, paying $15 an hour or whatever, and then take that job. Maybe they were doing a certain type of practice area. It could be construction law, it could be some side of IP, and then turn that $15 an hour job around to a $15,000 a month job, and when they graduate, just by having gotten that experience. So your summers are important for entry-level experience. What you did before law school is very important. People that were engineers often have very good opportunities in patent law, for example. People that were in the healthcare industry, same thing. People that were accountants and tax. And so anything you did before law school that's related to your practice area shows an interest in it. So that means you're likely to stick around and be a good hire. Things that you studied before law school, again, are very important. So if you studied something related to, majored in business, working as a corporate attorney would be a natural output of that. If you studied something related to English and writing, litigator. So all these sorts of things matter. Listing interests that are related to things like that. What interest could be clubs, but more important than clubs would be what written, things along those lines, talks related to the subject matter is very important, because if a law firm sees that, that's important. An example would be if, say, you wanted to work in healthcare law, and in the summers you worked maybe in a law firm that represented hospitals, but it was a small law firm. And then in law school, maybe you were majored in nursing, or before law school, maybe you were a nurse, and then maybe you studied that before law school. And then in law school, you were in the health law club. That is considered experience. So that's how you show that type of experience. You show it based on things that you've done. Someone that was a journalist and majored in English and before law school and wrote in the newspaper and stuff, that could be relevant to being a litigator or professional, all these types of things. So you are someone that worked in business as an analyst or something who's relevant to corporate law. So those are all relevant. So that relevant experience is important. And then a lot of times, so that's how you position yourself to work in law firms. You want to try to find out what is the practice area that it looks like you're going to do, and how do you tailor your experience to that. So if you're applying to be a corporate attorney in a law firm, you would take your resume, and what you would do is you would try to strip out stuff that makes it look like you're not interested in corporate law, which would be being a member of groups that have nothing to do with that. Or maybe they do, but they're too far removed. Litigation related work, or I don't know, but whatever types of groups that are things that are not related to that, would try to strip out. Now, I'm not telling you to remove experience, but you try to make it look like, and then if you've written papers about corporate law things or been in corporate law clubs, you would emphasize that. And then the final one, just for an entry level position, is how you did in law school and where you went to law school. So obviously good law schools help you, and doing very well in any law school helps you. So if you did really well in law school, that's going to determine the type of entry level position you can get. Going to New York Law School and finishing in the top 5% of your class would give you, it's not maybe the highest ranked law school, but it's a good law school, especially if you want to work in New York City. Same thing with University of Albany or University of Buffalo, like working in local markets. If you did really well in a law school, or even some national markets can happen. And then going to a good law school can also help with that as well. Okay, there's a lot of questions, so I'm going to keep asking them and I'll be answering them. And some of the ones that were asked earlier I'll also get to, but I'm just kind of on this page right now with the older ones, let's say, or newer ones. It's a better description. How should have dealt with this? We do in law firm websites, act as a contractor for high-level construction disputes at ICC, or my own competencies, legal research, drafting submissions, etc. Okay, so yes, you're better off describing experience that is not generic. So everyone expects a litigator to do legal research, draft different documents and things like you're talking about. You're better off describing thick types of things rather than being general. So if you're applying for a litigation job, one of the reasons that the ranking of the firm you're at is so important is because the ranking, like this 1 to 5 stuff, the ranking of the employer that you have experience with is so important, is because there's different types of requirements in terms of what's expected of individuals at different types of firms. One of my friends, when I was practicing law, started his first day at an insurance defense firm. And this is a funny story. What had happened was he had, and this is years ago, this might have been even in the early 90s or late 80s, I don't remember, but he had received a letter one day from a law firm he was going to work with. I think it was Morrison Forster. And it said, you're welcome to defer your job with us for a year, or you can cash this check for $30,000 and not come back after a year because the market was very slow. And again, lots of law firms did this at the time, and they're probably even doing it right now. They are doing it right now. So he just said, I'll cash the check, and took the check. And then his first job, the only job he could get, was with a small insurance defense firm. And he was from great law school and everything. It was just a bad market at the time. And so he took a job with this insurance defense firm. And his first day, they rolled in 150 cases on a push cart and said, these are your cases. Let us know how they go. Contact us for settlement approval or whatever. And so he just was, with no experience, with nothing, was expected to do that. So a lot of times the firm you're at, that of course would not happen at a 5 firm or a 4 firm or a 3 firm. That the smaller firms a lot of times will not give a lot of training. The quality of work, because of the sophistication of clients, isn't that important. Law firms can tell a lot about you based on the quality of firm you work at. So if you're at any AmLaw 100 law firm and you just write down I'm a litigation associate and that's all you say, they know what that means. If you're at a 3 firm, they may not. So then you can talk about that. But then you need to talk about and more kind of specifics. The reason that it's harder to get a job in a 5 firm as opposed to a 4 firm, as opposed to a 3 firm, is just because of the type of work and the depth of work that they go into. So at a 5 firm, a litigator may not even talk to a client for their first several years there, and may be working on in-depth memos and looking at things in a lot of depth. And they're taught to think about practicing law in a different way. Whereas at a 1 firm or a 2 firm, people are just getting stuff out the door. And if you're trying to move from a 2 firm to a 4 firm, you would try to give the impression on your resume that you're doing work in a way that these larger clients expect. And larger clients expect to work that way because they believe, and they're actually right a lot of the time, that spending more time on things gets better results and they can afford to spend the money. So if you're at a firm where you can spend the time and money to look at things, then it's helpful. And this is a big thing in the legal profession. So a lot of you may become solo practitioners. You may work in smaller firms. You may do all sorts of different things. And typically the people that are best in anything, whether it's athletes or music or anything, medicine, are the people that are able to really spend a lot of time becoming experts in something and look at things in a lot of depth. You study the most successful athletes, they practice the most, and they work on the intricacies of things. And the same thing with attorneys. Large companies can afford to pay people to do a lot of work, which produces a certain type of attorney compared to a smaller firm many times. To answer your question, describing projects you've done in more detail is more important many times than just saying you have the ability to do legal research. One of the ways, by the way, that attorneys demonstrate their skills is often with, and you can do this on your resume, is often with transaction sheets. So a transaction sheet essentially is a sheet that will talk about all the transactions you've done. If you're a corporate attorney, if you're a patent attorney, we'll talk about all the patents you've written. If you're a litigator, we'll talk in generalities, unless it's publicly reported, about different cases you've worked on. And I've found that the best attorneys always keep these because they're just very proud of it. That's their life, and they're proud of the work that they've done and the experience they've gotten. So instead of just listing all that on your resume, anytime I see an attorney with a transaction sheet, that automatically shows, and litigators do, everyone that takes their job seriously does it because it's your marketing piece. And the reason what I'm talking about today is so important about your resume is that, and your transaction sheets and how you position yourself, is this is what you don't understand. And what a lot of people don't understand is this is your business. Like being an attorney is something that gives you a license to go out there and run a business, and you're selling your skills and the work that you do. As a business, you need to be able to sell yourself. And so that's what your resume is. It's your sales document. And if you were a company and had one sales document, like what would you do wouldn't you make that the most important thing in the world? Do you have? Okay, here we go. So this is a good point, and I'm going to add this one. And then again, I'm going to keep adding these questions. There's a lot of people that have asked questions. I'm going to get to them, but let's see here. Next question. It seems like many employers prefer to have fresh faces right out of law school, or maybe moldable, rather than someone with lots of experience, 10 to 20 years. Even if that experience is directly relevant to the job. The result is not even getting an interview, even when extremely qualified for the job. What would you suggest in terms of adjusting a resume to proactively avoid this type of bias? Okay, so there is a lot of bias in the legal profession. It's always been there. It's not particular to any firm. It doesn't make people, it's just how it works. There's also a bias in athletics and in Hollywood, and it's just the way it is. So people come out of school, and when they come out of school, they typically have fresh ideas, but also a lot of enthusiasm, and they're willing to learn, and they have a lot more energy, and they're prioritizing their career over family and other things. And they also typically don't yet have sour grapes. And what are sour grapes? Sour grapes are, you go to an employer, you have some bad experiences, and then you want to avoid those experiences. So you act in a certain way, or you're defensive and stuff in the future. And it's like that in every profession. I'm not, isn't it? Frankly, in my business, I was even thinking, I certainly believe that I have a lot of fresh ideas, but certainly people that are younger than me would a lot of times see social media and things a different way than I did, because it certainly didn't exist when I started. And that stuff is all very relevant. Law firms are the same way. They're looking for typically either very young people, right out of law school with a few years of law school, who are still enthusiastic and really want the job, or they're looking for people with experience that have a lot of business. So when you're young, when lawyers are young as associates, your main product that you offer the employer is you offer them the ability to work hard. You offer them the ability to commit. They offer you the prospect of maybe being partner if you put in an extraordinary effort. You offer them those are the main things. And then you offer them the ability to learn, and then the ability to make partners feel important based on the work that you're doing and so forth. And people certainly like to feel important. That's attorneys. Everyone likes to feel important. It's one of the kind of primary human needs, is to want to feel important. And essentially what that means is you want people to, whatever it is, partners like associate, and not associates to make them feel important. They're like secretaries to make them feel important. They want to feel like a big deal. People, just how it is. And so when people become older attorneys, many times they feel like they know everything, or they know how things are done, or they're unwilling to do things in a different manner. So how do you adjust your resume to avoid that bias? If you're applying to law firms, most law firms in major cities there's different types of attorneys. So there's binders. I'm sure you've seen this before, but I'll just write it down: binders and grinders. So a binder is someone that watches other people doing the work, which is our kind of admin people. Binders are typically people that go out and do the work, and then grinders are the people that do. Binders are people that bring in business. And then grinders are watch people doing work, or administrators. Then binders are bring in work. And then grinders are the ones that do the work. So if you don't have business, you're not obviously a binder, and you may not have the skills as a minder. Minder jobs are often very sought out in law firms by people that don't have business. Those are hard to get. Then you become a grinder. Law firms, by the way, will hire grinders all the time, and they don't care, if they believe that you the work, they will hire people with 20 plus years of experience if you're the best person they can find. So I get calls from every day, full job orders and things from law firms all over the country seeking grinders. Most of the time, they're seeking grinders in very specific practice areas. So it could be like securities law, it could be a certain type of patent work, it could be healthcare, who knows, but they always need grinders. So the way to get a job and avoid the bias is basically to be like, this is what I do. I love this work. It's all I've ever done. I would like to work for you. And so you can certainly get positions as a grinder, as a more senior attorney. Law firms just tend to prefer binders to grinders. That's what at the senior level, because it's much more difficult to give grinders senior level work. But the problem with giving grinders senior level work is that means that instead of a partner doing the work, that a senior attorney has to do it, and they have to. Essentially, what happens is partners, when they bill out their own work, make more money than if they give it to someone else to do. So most senior level attorneys would be billing out as a senior attorney, and billing out as a senior attorney, they would be basically taking away money from partners. And most clients also want senior partners to do the work rather than a senior attorney coming from possibly another firm. Okay, I got that one. Let me just see here. Okay, these are great questions. Can we get an agenda or slides? Sure. Someone asked this question to obtain CLE credit. That's a great idea. Let me see here. Yeah, so I can send the slides from this. I'll ask someone from this to send the slides to everyone that was on the call. That's a good idea. So this question is the length of an attorney's resume. How many pages should it be? The best resumes are typically often the shortest. You don't need to do a lot of description of what you do. But one of the problems that I don't like, and this is actually a very good question. One of the things that I don't like is there's all these kind of professional resume companies out there that do resumes for attorneys. And typically what they will do is they will write this huge, I'm trying to fix something here. They'll write this huge introduction, and the introduction will go into a lot of detail about a person's experience. It'll say something like motivated and experienced a corporate attorney that does this and this. And typically when someone sees that, they automatically know a resume company's done it. And often they'll use keywords and all sorts of things with the expectation that it won't be reviewed by humans, which in some cases it's true. But the resume really should, if all possible, be one page, and then you can attach a transaction sheet. You never need to go into that much detail. Often a resume longer than one page is just confusing. So I don't know why they do this, but attorney resumes are the worst. They will go into an incredible amount of detail that's unnecessary. And typically, the longer the resume, the worse the attorney. And I don't mean that in an insulting way to anyone, but you should not need to say a lot of information. The employer that you work with should do most of the talking, and you should have very short things. And the problem with long resumes is it's often confusing because the person will say, here I did this, and then it'll be a completely different experience in another employer, and then from there it'll be even different experience, and you're like, what the hell's going on? I have no idea what this person's doing, and it doesn't get people jobs. And so the way to get a job is to have a very short resume that's very focused and makes it very clear what you do in one practice area. And again, I've seen resumes I have candidates that get tons of interviews, and you could get a lot of interviews, and it doesn't matter where you went to law school. It doesn't matter. What matters is your focus and how focused the resume looks. It's really the most important thing. Now, it's not to say that you can move from a 1 firm to a 4 firm with a resume that's not with your resume, but you can get lots of jobs at firms that are at the caliber of work that you're currently doing based on your resume being focused. And so everyone should have a focused resume. There's nothing wrong, by the way, with being at any type of firm. Everyone needs to start somewhere. And every practice area, by the way, this is something to understand too. Like, I want to be very clear that there's nothing wrong with working at a 1 firm. Some of the attorneys that work at 1 firms make more money than attorneys at 4 or 5 firms. I have some lemon law firms which I guess sue auto manufacturers when one of their clients' cars breaks down too much, that pay $300,000 or $400,000 a year to associates. And you can make a lot of money in all sorts of practice areas, and you can have a lot of job security in all sorts of practice areas. You can, a lot of times, law firms, because they're consumer facing, you can run a very good business. If you learn insurance defense, you can start working directly for insurance companies and have very good business. There's all sorts of opportunities at every type of law firm or practice area. So I'm not by any stretch of the imagination being critical of any practice area or any size firm, but your resume should just say what you do. And that's, let me see, good. Okay, so another question, is it a good idea for young attorneys to hire a professional resume writer? I would say in most cases, no. And the reason that but if you feel like you're in crisis, then maybe you can. But most resume writers don't really understand things through the same goggles that a law firm's looking at things. They're just seeing it through their eyes. And when you have humans looking at things from a certain point of view, that's not good. So a lot of times I'll see professional resume writers and they'll say something like, I went to Harvard Law School and I worked at this big firm. That's great, but they're only going to see things from the perspective many times, not always, of someone that went to Harvard Law School and works in big firms. And so they're going to think if you're not someone like them, that whatever advice they're offering is unimportant because you're not. I hate to say that, but humans are often they bring their prejudices to things. And because of that influences the final product and can be very risky. It's interesting, like I've hired lots of recruiting coordinators in the past to work at our company, and I've hired them from big firms, like think whatever. But I remember this one recruiting coordinator I hired, she was probably the largest law firm in Chicago. And so she, unbeknownst to me, was requesting everyone's transcript that was applying that I was assigning her candidates that approached our company, and almost no one was good enough to work with her. So she would take them and basically push them out, applying the same standards that this firm that has Supreme Court clerks and all sorts of things working in it was applying to all of its applicants, which is insane. That's an example of someone bringing their prejudices to an attorney. So you have to be very careful about having people work on your resume. You're often better off but one thing I would say would be fun, because it's such an important document, sometimes maybe getting the opinion of a couple different resume writers could be helpful, and seeing what they do. The problem with resume writers in general is when they do these kind of write-ups and they write up about when they write things up, they'll write all this stuff at the beginning, like saying, I'm and accomplished this and this and spearheaded this. And really what they're doing is they're writing it for you, the customer, and not the employers, because they're bringing out all your experience. You think you're great and it makes you feel good about yourself, but it's not something that necessarily will get you a job. I hate to say that, but and then they've learned through experience that that's what makes people happy and gives them good reviews, but it's not necessarily always a resume that gets people a job. I'm not saying there's people that are bad at it, because there are very good resume writers, but it's a very difficult job. It's a very difficult job. Okay, I'm just looking through the questions. I don't really see any more. I apologize for this whole thing freezing up. Let me see if there's any other question. Yeah, and this is someone saying they used a resume writer and had to review one. That's from Renee, and that's a good point. And so what is the best way to address a resume gap when an attorney is taking time off work and due to medical concerns? So people take time off from work all the time. It's very common, especially for people having kids or traveling, but kids are a big one. Medical concerns are also a big one. I've interviewed people before. It was funny. I opened an office in Las Vegas years ago, and I was interviewing people, and some of them had these gaps in their resume. And I was like, what are these gaps for? And a couple of people wouldn't give me answers. And I was like, that's weird. So I Googled them and found out they'd been to jail or prison, and that's why their gaps were. One person told me they'd been to prison, and I thought it was funny. It happened in Vegas, and of course I didn't hire them. But so the point is, taking years off for medical concerns that's very common. Lots of people will take time off for those reasons, also for having children and raising them. I saw an interesting thing. I bring this up just because there's a lot of very good firms that will allow people to take even years off to raise children and come back. Davis Polk is one of them. Someone took years off there and came back. It was a very good firm. But the point is that you can always address the resume gaps, and law firms will either accept it or not, but people can definitely get jobs if you've taken time off due to medical concerns. You can talk about it. You can say the reasons in an interview. It often makes you more likable and makes people feel good that they're helping someone that may have had problems in the past, or it can turn the firm off and think that you're going to continually have problems. The biggest drawback, I think, from an employer standpoint of hiring someone with medical concerns is those concerns that motivated the medical leave in the past typically will often come back. And that's the problem, is that the people that took the medical leave at one point will then take it again. And so you need to be able to convince people that's not going to happen. And I say that as someone that's hired a lot of people. I have a big heart, and I've hired a lot of people with serious medical problems or who've overcome them. And almost always, I can think of lots of instances they've come back, whatever those were. So you have to be able to convince people of that it's not going to happen again. Okay. Is being overqualified for grinder work a problem? Should I redraft my resume for mid-level positions? So what you have to think about, again, you have to look at things from the employer's point of view. So again, the idea would be for a grinder job, law firms are asking, can you do the job? Will you do the job long-term? So if you're someone that's had a lot of history of business generation or leadership, and then you're suddenly trying to apply for a grinder job, law firms are going to know that you're probably not going to want to do that. And so they're going to try to not hire you. If I had a job for someone to just sit down and work, and all the person talked about was their leadership ability and how they'd done all this, and I would run for the hills because I know they wouldn't do the work. Now I might have another job for that person, but for the most part, I would know I need a certain type of person. So you typically are going to want to have a resume, especially for a mid-level job, that's going to talk about that. Law firms, depending on the law firm you're applying to, they may want you to look like you have the ability in the future to generate business, or that you're starting to generate business, and that you be very humble about it. Don't make the law firm feel like think you're better than them or too good to do work, because you still have to be able to do the work. And that's why they're hiring you. And now the business you bring may be an extra benefit. Okay, someone asked, can a law student's resume be less than half a page? And the answer to that is no. You probably need to have something that is at least a page. Now it can be short. There's nothing wrong with that. But you have to also, you want to look like you're interesting or interested in something. So it can certainly be short, but and it doesn't, you don't want to have too much fluff on there, but you do want to have enough on there that it looks like you're interested in being an attorney or you have some sort of experience. But yeah, less than half a page is not, I honestly, I don't know that I've ever seen a resume like that. That's less than half a page. So you need to try to get stuff on there. Now, if it is only half a page and that's all you have, that may be okay, but I would say you want to try to make your resume a little bit longer than you can. Okay, and this looks like maybe the last question I have. Let me just see here. 1 second. How can you showcase your skills and qualifications if you don't have any campus involvement to include in your law school resume? So there's nothing wrong with not having any campus involvement on your resume. Attorneys are businesses and law firms are businesses, so people will still hire you without any campus involvement. Maybe your emphasis was on working a job while you're in school. Maybe it was just on your grades. So there's no need to have any campus involvement. But typically what I would say is if you are interested in the practice of law and you're interested in, then you should try to get some campus involvement on your resume or be interested in something, whether it doesn't have to be on campus. It can be something outside of campus or related to what the kind of work you want to do. But you have to, people want to hire people that are interested in something so they can channel that passion into something. It's interesting. There's a lot of discussion about Harvard admitting people and how that works and how colleges admit people, not so much law schools, but colleges. What a lot of colleges are looking for when they become very selective is they're looking for people that show a passion for something. It could be, I remember when I was applying to colleges, my advisor was like the person that got into, I don't know, Harvard the year before or something, or whatever, was interested in bugs and, but didn't have great grades and just were interested in bugs. And so colleges typically, and law firms are the same, want to challenge your passion for something into hours and achievement in the legal profession. So it could be your practice area, it could be something, but they need to be able to channel that into something. So if you don't show any particular passion, you're just practicing law, then you're not really reaching your full potential. An example would be what I do. So I'm very interested in this. I love it. I do it. I start my day at 4 to 5 a.m. and I've been doing this, and that's one of the reasons I have information to offer. But if I wasn't interested and I was just doing this to earn money or to whatever, or to pretend like I'm a big deal because I went to a big law school and I want something that makes me look like I'm still involved in the legal profession, I don't know, but this is what people do. And people go into professions all the time for the wrong reasons. And you need to realize that the more passion you have for something, the better off you'll be. So when you look at a lot of the most successful attorneys, they're very interested in sometime in what they're doing, and they have a lot of passion for it. I don't know why, but it's natural to them. Very successful corporate attorneys I've met have passion for business, and they love business, and they love advising businesses, and they consider themselves experts in business, and they love coming up with solutions for businesses, and it's very exciting to them. And same thing with litigators. Litigators often have a lot of passion for a certain aspect of litigation. Same thing with patent attorneys, with technology. And so you need to have some sort of passion. And that's what the best colleges are looking for. That's what it could be swimming. The best colleges, they don't care. They want a passion for something. If you're a really good athlete, and that helps the school, but it also, that can be channeled into athletes often become very successful later because they've learned discipline. And it's just, you have to be passionate about something. And that's the biggest piece of advice that I have. And in your resume, to the extent that it reflects passion and interest, preferably, and the subject matter is important. I'll just give you some examples. I talk to very successful attorneys all the time. And one of the most successful attorneys in Los Angeles with a book of business that is now north of 80 million. It's just hard to believe, but it's true. He's just passionate about not only practicing corporate law, but advising businesses. And he just loves it. He thinks about it all the time. He drives around, and it's insane how much. And successful litigators are very passionate about litigation. Often they're passionate about a certain type of litigation. So you just have to have some interest in this stuff. And it's not to say that this interest you have to know what it is. You may not even know, graduating from law school, what you're interested in. You may not even know in 2 or 3 years, but you have to develop that passion, because if you don't develop that passion, someone that has that passion is going to be better than you. They're going to get clients. They're going to think about who you would want to hire. Would you want to hire someone to represent you that was just mildly interested in something, or just doing it because they had good grades in a school? And that doesn't make sense. I have a lot of relatives that are lawyers and doctors and things like that. And the ones that are the most successful have a huge interest and passion. And the ones that aren't are often the ones that were the smartest, but don't have any interest. And they're doing things like working for the government and jobs where they aren't that accountable. I'm not saying there's anything wrong working for the government. I'm not criticizing it, but they're not making the most of their talents where if they were passionate and really interested in something, they could be doing a lot more. That's my advice. Now, you don't have to know what that is, but you have to find something that taps into your natural skills and makes you very effective. It was interesting, and I'll just tell the story, and then looks like this is all the questions, and then I'll end it. But there's one. Okay, there's one other question I'll answer, but I'll just tell this quick story. I have a relative that grew up in this very traumatic family where there was substance abuse and fighting, and this person was mediating disputes all the time, and then became very good at it from a very young age, from like the age of 5. Don't hit my mommy, daddy. I mean, all this kind of stuff, and very sad. But this person became very passionate about and tuned in to mediating disputes between people, and then became an extremely successful person that had a job created for them in a major corporation to do, paying hundreds of thousands of dollars a year with an education from a fourth-tier college, mediating in disputes between basically clients and the company. So it's just that you can, anything you're passionate about and interested in, should tap in maybe to your childhood. It can tap into the subject you're interested in. It could tap into your experience, but it should be something that moves you and makes you interesting and interested in something, because that will make it fun for you to do. And then if something's fun for you to do, then you're going to do a lot better at it in the future. Because a lot of students are going to have legal field. This is something I should be worried about. Probably not. You don't need to know people in the legal field to get a job as a law student. But you should try to get to know people. You should try to go to events. You should try to go to bar association events and learn about things. You should try to go to events in your school. You should try to go watch speakers, and you should try to connect with these speakers afterwards. And most of my mentors and people that I've met came from getting out of the library and getting out of my office and going and meeting people. And so that's something I would try to do. Doing that will show you the kinds of things you can be interested in, the kinds of people you can be interested in, things that make you interested in. You may go to some people will go to a talk on tax law and think it's the most boring thing in the world and feel like jumping off a building. Other people will go and think, wow, I can't believe, where's this tax law been all my life? And so going to talks, listening to different people's experience, videos, emailing people saying you enjoyed a talk they gave online, or just anything you can do to connect and get out there can be extremely helpful. Well, thank you everyone for being on this webinar and all of your questions today. And we'll be back next week. It'll be fun to do a resume review, but we will, and we may do that. But I do appreciate everyone being on this call. I will also try to email everyone the PowerPoint as well, so you can hopefully get credit for that. So I think we do have your email addresses, so I'll try to send what the PowerPoint would have been for today. Thank you.